Having said that, let's go into flowers. Thank you, Reb Chaim. We are continuing Unit 9 of the Morenu units.
You're welcome.
Sir Naim Dangur and Sir Mosman Fiore. We are talking about flowers. So presumably flowers have two primary purposes, right? One is to look at them, and the other is they improve the look of the Shabbos table, and the kitchen, the living room, and the other is that they have a nice smell. Now, admittedly, usually when you choose flowers for Shabbos, the smell is only deemed a bonus, right? I don't think anyone goes to a corner shop and says, what flowers do you have? And they say, wow, these flowers smell really great. You say, yeah, they look awful. So like, what else? He says, no. Smell them. You'll see their smell is so good that that overrides your decision about the nicer looking flowers, right? It's more like a tiebreaker, right? As if you don't, do you agree? There are plants that are used primarily for creating perfumes and things like that. So there are plants like that. But when we're buying flowers for Shabbos, we have something else. We're buying flowers for our kitchen, buying flowers for our living room. We're going to focus on the way they look, and the smell would be an added bonus. It would be maybe a tiebreaker, but it wouldn't be a primary reason to choose. So we're going to discuss that's going to affect some of our discussion later on. So I just want to say that up front. The Yerushalmi and the Bavli both do not discuss flowers directly. What the Yerushalmi discusses is besamim, perfumes, right? There's plants that are used for perfume and not for inedible plants, because everything in this unit is inedible. If it's edible, it's a different story. Everything in this unit is inedible. So inedible plants that are used primarily for perfumes. Do they have kedushat shvit? Presumably it would be this exact question. Now, the thing about perfume is we know in terms of physics that really the flowers perfume, right? The plants, the aroma of the plant is constantly diminishing, right? That's how we know the physics of it works like that. But in the Chazalian world, we don't take that into account. It's not deemed. It's not seen as because it's not evident. You don't see it, and therefore it's not considered something that's being used up, right? When I smell something, so the truth is that molecules are going into my nose. Otherwise, I wouldn't smell it. But halacha doesn't recognize those molecules; they're irrelevant halachically, and therefore, what we're talking about here is having pleasure from the perfume, even though the perfume is not harmed. The plant is not harmed. Nishmeina, so there's no bi'ul, right? We talked about bi'ul, it's like utilization in a way that doesn't allow to carry over souvenirs. That doesn't exist here. Nishmeina min hada. They propose to learn it from Ha'perach HaLavan, Va'orez, and Kedushat Shvit. I'm not going to go into what orez is. It's not rice, because rice obviously would have Kedushat Shvit. Ha'perach HaLavan presumably is a kind of flower used for perfume, right? It has a good smell, and it does not have Kedushat Shvit. So that's that. Chavraya Amrei, the Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbi Shimon Amar in Aktav Shvit b'mnei she'eno pri. They say no. Ha'perach HaLavan is Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Rabbi Shimon is talking about the what's it called? What's the word for saraf? I'm forgetting the words. Sorry?
The sap.
The sap, thank you. Sap, right? So you Canadians know very well, right, about the importance of the maple sap specifically, right? But that's an edible one. Most of them are inedible. We're going to go back to the question of the edible or inedible. So the ktaf we know from Pitum Aktoret, right? That's a kind of bosem that does not have. It's Rabbi Shimon's opinion, so presumably Tanakama disagrees. So the way the Yerushalmi presents it so far, it seems that plants that are used primarily for perfumes would be a machloket. So the Stama de Braita sounds like flowers, right? Flowers that are used for their odor primarily. Not Kedushat Shvit. Then the Chevre say, no, this is Rabbi Shimon, who has a general opinion like that, but it sounds like Chachamim disagree and would say it does have. Rabbi Shmuel b'shem Rabbi Abahu tipater divrei akoli ba'adan is solta. So Rabbi Shmuel B'Shem Rabbi Abahu says like this. He says, we agree there's a machloket. So let's see, what do we know? We know that ktaf is a machloket. What about perach halavan? The chevre say perach halavan follows the same machloket. Rabbi Shimon B'Shem Rabbi Abahu says, no. Perach halavan we're talking about here is a specific kind of perach halavan. So just broadly speaking, we know we have a machloket about ktaf. We're not sure how this affects other odorous plants. So other aromatic plants. Beseder. That's what we have from the Yerushalmi so far. I'm leaving it vague because all the Achronim are going to disagree about it, but this Yerushalmi say. So I'm going to leave that vague. But that's, broadly speaking, again, we're not talking about flowers we put in our living room yet. The Yerushalmi, at least, is not discussing that, right? The Yerushalmi is talking about flowers that are used for their aroma, right? We're talking about perfumes, right? That kind of plant. And that, it seems, would be a machloket Rabbi Shimon Chachamim, although we have to understand what Nesolta means. That we'll have to figure out. We'll see that soon. And Rabbi Baruch wants to point something out. Go ahead.
Just that historically, aromatic plants were seen as having healing properties. So it wasn't just that they had an aroma, but that they also were seen as what people today call aromatherapy. And moreover, plants and other aroma type things were used at funerals and in relationship to anything that might be decaying in order to cover up the scent.
Correct.
And in that sense, they have a very specific usage.
Yafeh. So just because Rabbi Baruch mentioned this, I signed the Rabbeinu Bachye on this last week's parsha. He asks, why is Mizbach HaKtoret brought at the end after all the other kelim, after everything, like an afterthought? Oh, by the way, there's something about Mizbach HaKtoret. So the Ramban has this whole Kabbalic take on that, which I gave a shiur on last week. And the Rambam, not in this forum, in a Parshat Shavua forum, the Rambam has a very Rambamic view of Mizbach HaKtoret. Rambam says, what was he say, Baruch?
Oh, I'm just nodding because in
so
general, the Rambam would be.
So the Rambam says like this. What do you think the Mikdash smells like? It smells like blood. It smells like burnt meat. It smells like, right? The Rashi on Rach Nichoach explains why is it Rach Nichoach? Rach Nichoach doesn't mean the actual aroma of the korban. Rach Nichoach is the pleasure of knowing that Hashem gave the commandment and it was obeyed. Siftei Chachamim ask on Rashi, why don't you just say it's the steaks burning? He says, no, that's all very well when you start cooking them, but once they start burning, they smell awful. Says the Rambam, right? So clearly, the Rach Nichoach cannot be the burnt meat because that does not smell good. Says the Rambam, why do you have Mizbach HaKtoret?
It's to cover up the scent of the
Exactly.
Mikdash.
Exactly. So it's a very Rambamic.
Hello.
Rabbeinu Bachya says that's a terrible thing. It's not like that at all. Beseder. So now that's to your second comment. That's to your first comment. Please hold on to it. We're going to get back to it. Remind me of that comment when we hit the Tzitz Eliezer. Because it's going to be very useful. The one about the aromatherapy.
Who? The ELT went out. ELT went out for.
Okay. That's it. It's a good thing I recognize his voice. Now, it says, so let's start going through this. So the Rosh Sirlo explains that this is exactly the machloket tamid achilat dam achilat be'ema v'tzivei v'tzviya v'adlakat havei dami de'achila na'tov v'lo shavim v'rech b'shat ha'na'ata leika bi'ur. Therefore, law. Why do perfumes not have Kedushat Shvi'it? Presumably, because there's no hana'ah b'shat bi'ur, no bi'ur b'shat hana'ah, right? So there's nothing destructive, right? There's no utilization. There isn't the same kind of utilization, the destructive kind of utilization when you're smelling something. And therefore it doesn't, and that's why we didn't have kedusha. That's the Rosh Hashanah explains based on basically what we were saying so far. That's the Rishalmi's debate. Let's have a look at the Rambam. This is the Rambam. Ktaf hu saraf yotze me'ilanot min ha'alim u'me'ikarim. Ein lo shvi'it. So it doesn't. All right. באמת ואומרים באילן מאכל. אבל באילן סרק, אף יוצא מן העלים ומעיקרים כפרי שלהן ויש לו לגביו שביעית. The Rambam says that depends on whether it's the central output of the tree or not. If I have a tree, and this some explain, just to give the Rambam a bit of a source, that's the Hadana Sota. And I'll explain what that means in this context, the Hadana Sota. The Rambam is saying like this. If you have a fruit tree and it also has flowers that have some kind of aroma, so the tree is mainly for fruit. That doesn't count. So they don't have kedusha. But if you have a tree that has no other output, that's its central output. So you're growing the tree for that does have kedusha shvit. That's the way the Rambam. That's the Rambam's psak. It seems that the Rambam is saying like this. Fundamentally, aromatic leaves and plants, etc., would have kedusha, unless they're secondary to the primary use of the tree. Right? That seems to be the Rambam's psak. So it says the Rabbeinu explains exactly that way. So he says this is exactly the idea when we're talking about perfumes, we're talking about flowers, those kinds of things. So there are two separate questions. One question is, do you grow the tree for that? Is that a pleasure you benefit from this tree, etc., from this plant, etc.? And the answer is yes. So fine. So kedushat shvit, no reason not, unless it's secondary. The Rambam, according to Rabbeinu, is not concerned about the question of is the utilization destructive, right? Does utilization require harming the tree, as it were, right? The Rambam is not concerned by this. Right, and so it would seem, based on this, if we follow through with this, so the flowers we buy for our living room and our Shabbos table will also have shvit based on this, right? Because they're not harming, you don't harm them while you're using them, but you do use them. They are useful, you do pay for them, so shvit. All right. That's the Brina. Now, Rav Kanievsky has a different take. Rav Kanievsky says, hold on. The Rambam is talking about kataf. He isn't talking about any aromatic plant. He's talking about kataf specifically. What's special about kataf? So Chaim, what's special about kataf? In other words, sap.
It's a sap.
What's special about sap as opposed to other? I'm asking you because you're Canadian.
Why depends what you use it.
Also
You can actually do something with that. It's something that you can benefit from it, but you have to do it through a process.
So the process doesn't bother me so much because wheat also has to be processed, and wheat clearly has kedushat shvit, right? The process doesn't bother me. Rav Kanievsky says we're not talking about any sap. We're talking about a specific kind of sap. The ketaf is a specific sap that's edible. Since it's edible, that's why it has kedushat shvit, unless it's secondary to the primary fruit, right? But so it says Rav Kanievsky, this whole halacha has nothing to do with what we're learning. This whole halacha is talking about edible sap, and the question is, do people bother eating the sap? And if it's a tree that has other fruit, they won't bother eating the sap. If it's a tree that doesn't have other fruit, they will. So it's totally relevant to our halacha. We have a similar thing with honeysuckle. Is that what it's called? Honeysuckle? Familiar with honeysuckle? Any of you remember being children and taking honeysuckle, right? I remember as a kid, we'd take, you know what I'm talking about? Honeysuckle?
It's ice. You do it in the winter. You take honey. You pour on ice and you take it.
Oh no, not referring to that. It's a certain flower. The certain flower that you can take the end off and you can suck and you really You really could taste the.
I know. It's
sugar that's in-
longish. It's white or yellow, longish.
Right. Exactly. Exactly so. So I'm saying so in that case, so the honeysuckle theoretically would have kedusha. I don't know if people bother picking it and using it so much, so maybe it doesn't count. But theoretically, that's the kind of thing the Rambam's talking about when he says the ketaf has shvit. So far, what do we have? All right, just to sum up what we have so far. Cirillo explains we're talking about. Cirillo explains we're talking about that. Sorry, the whole debate in the Yerushalmi is the question of am I concerned about whether the fruit is being utilized and destroyed as I enjoy it, right? The flowers, the aroma, the aromatic plants, etc. That's the Rosh Hashanah. Imre Bina explains that this is the Rambam agrees that's exactly the point, and in Ochinami it would have kedusha unless it's secondary to some other primary fruit. Rav Kanievsky says there's no way to prove from this Rambam. So what do? If we have no way to prove the Rambam, we'll go to Chumrah. That's what he says. So the bottom line of the Yerushalmi is unclear, and therefore we have to go L'chumrah. That's so far. So based on all those, L'chora, you have to go L'chumrah. Chazon Ish explains, and you have to understand the Yerushalmi differently. It says like this. Yerushalmi, b'samim mar she'elen kedushat shvi'it, Chavraya Amre d'Rabbi Shimoni v'chulei. Yichora had the b'samim v'ad k'taf lo dame klal. Says, hold on. What's Yerushalmi saying? It seems, presumably, it looks like, I'd think that any other perfume and ktaf have nothing to do with each other. Why? B'samim afilu tan she'enam rak l'reach v'enam ruim l'achila chashivei pti. Chashuvin piryan etzel adam v'akol melaktin otam. Right? The ktaf is a very specialized thing that is only used sometimes, as opposed to the perfumes. The perfumes are perfumes. If they're useful, they're useful. What's the Gemara saying that you could deduce one from the other, but it's not so clear how. So he has a very mechudash way of reading the Gemara. It says like this: רבי שמעון אשר רבי אלעזר אמר דברי הקולי בעדן נסורתא, כלומר באלה הנושרים גם רבנן מאוד בטלים לעץ תגרי מכתב ולא אי אפשר תשאר בסמים. Meaning, the Yerushalmi is saying like this. And now we learn what is Nesota. So the Rambam learned Nesota as secondary. If I have fruit and I have a secondary use, and it's right. So the flowers are secondary to the central fruit. But the Chazon Ish wants to explain the Gemara, the Yerushalmi as follows. The assumption is that perfumes have kedushat shvit. Why? Why not? Now, when the Yerushalmi asks here bisamim and then compares it to perach halavan and to ktaf, it's saying what is ktaf? Ktaf is something that's edible, but it's not the central use. So we're comparing something edible to something that's used for aroma, right? But he says, no, it's the Yerushalmi, again, taking a step back. We said before, there are two questions. When the Rambam gives the psak here, he relates 2 points, right? 2 issues. Issue number 1 is you're not wasting it while you're using it, right? You're getting pleasure out of the aromatic flowers or plants without ruining them. That's the 2 questions. Number 1 is, are you harming the thing you're getting pleasure out of, right? The thing you're benefiting from, getting pleasure out of? That's one question. Another question is it the primary use of this plant? Is this the main reason people grow it? Now, the way we've been learning the Yerushalmi so far, put the first question as the central focus. The central question is, perfumes, are they really kedushat shvit? Is that considered something that you utilize, that you waste, that you destroy, that you harm, etc.? That's what we did so far. Chazon Ish says no. The whole question is the other way around. How do I know? Because ktaf is edible. What's the machloket? It's edible, but it's secondary. So the discussion is not the central discussion. The primary discussion is not about is not about the question of aroma. Does aroma have kedushat shvit? The Yerushalmi assumes aroma has kedushat shvit. The question is, what about the primary use of? Right? If this is the primary use, if there's not the primary use of this plant, does it have kedushat shvit? So I have a tree that grows fruit and it also has sap that's useful. Is the sap also kadosh, or do I say that's not what you grow it for? So the Chazon Ish turned everything around, but fundamentally, right? So I'll just read this again over here. Right? They're bottom, right? They're secondary, so you don't take them seriously. You think of them as the primary use. The comparison with kataf. Just a second. Rabbi Shimon Shama Elazar אמר דברי הקולי בעדן נסורתא. צאן אמר באלה נושרים גם רבנן מאוד בטלים לעץ. דגרי מכתב. Meaning, what kind of perach halavan? What is perach halavan? Perach halavan, according to this pshat, they explain, is, for example, have any of you ever seen citrus trees, how they grow their fruit?
Yeah.
So first you have a white flower in most of them. You have a white flower, and then when the fruit starts blossoming, the flower falls. Right? That's in the sota here, the neshota. The perach shenosher. Now, those flowers have a great smell, but no one bothers taking them because you have to leave them for the fruit. Right? If you ever go by where there's a citrus tree, and you have at the flowering stage, it smells wonderful. It's a great smell, but it's not usually used for perfumes, etc., because you save it to allow the fruit to grow. So the Chazon Ish says that's what we're talking about. We say nesot at the end here, and therefore the bottom line is we don't know what about the rest of the samim, and so the bottom line would be. Right, so the bottom line would be that there would have kedushat shvit, right? So again, the Chazon Ish, just to make sense out of what we did, because it's a bit complicated, but there are two questions that we keep on relating to. Question number one is the question of things that are plants that are used for for aroma, to look at, so that are not, so you don't ruin them as you utilize them and enjoy them. That's number one. Number two is things that are not the primary use, the secondary purpose of a plant. So far, most of overall, the way it worked was, the Rosh Sirla and the Imre Bina both explained that we're talking about the first question, which is where we came from, right? Question of, I'm not ruining the flowers as I'm enjoying them, so do that kedushat shvit, and the answer is begadol, yes. Kanievsky said, wait, we're talking about, the Rambam is talking about something that's edible, so you can't say the Rambam is talking about that. And therefore, and this fits into the Chazon Ish, who says, yes, the comparison in the Yerushalmi was not at all on the plane of comparison, was not in the question of, are you harming it while you're using it? The plane of comparison was, is this the primary or secondary use? And therefore, the bottom line would be also, according to Chazon Ish, perfume, the Gemara has to assume, does have Kedusha. That's how Rav Tikuchinsky says, La halacha, we see over here, צמחים עומדים לריח, כגון מיני ורדים ושושנים ושאר מיני בשמים הנטעים לריחם, יש בהם קדושת שביעית, גם מנעת ריח, כנעת מור וצביעה, ראו בכלל לכם, לכל צורככם. It's also לכם, it's also useful, it's also pleasurable, so why should not have קדושת שביעית? הריח גם הוא הנעתו ובעירו שווה. כמו כן, דבר שהנעתו קודם ביור, יש בו קדושת שביעית, right, as we said, this would fit Balamor, this would, doesn't fit Rashi, right, just pointing out, right? Balamor doesn't fit Rashi. הדי אלפין דומי דלא אוכלה, דבר נעתו ובעירו שווה, זהו להפוג דבר שהנעתו אחר ביור. לפני בו התועלת של הפרי. So as we said, there are two ways of reading הנעתו ובעירו שווה. One way is to say that you must harm it as you utilize it, as you gain pleasure, as you benefit. Those three things have to happen simultaneously. The other way of saying it is you cannot harm it until you benefit from it. So Rav Tikuchinsky here, based on the Chazon Ish, is following the logic from the Chazon Ish, which would therefore follow the logic of the Mishnah Rishona and Balamar, and say you cannot harm it until you benefit from it. Now, question: do you benefit from aromatic plants before you harm them? The answer is yes. It's like good. So that's Gzat Shvit. Now, again, that would, for us, that's a problem, right? Again, Gzat Shvit it's a great thing, but I'd say it creates more trouble than it solves, right? Because this would raise the question: are you allowed to buy flowers from a street corner, from a vendor you don't have a hechsher from, etc.? Right? If you don't know where the flowers are from, are you allowed to buy them in Eretz Yisrael during Shmita? It's a very big question, right? Or do you need a hechsher? You need to that cheshut for every flower you buy, every time you want to buy flowers for Shabbos, to make sure that the heter mechira, chutzart, whatever. Now let's see the Tzitz Eliezer. I'll say in one word what the Tzitz Eliezer says. Tzitz Eliezer says. Now I just want to point out. Hold on. Before I say Tzitz Eliezer, I just want to point out Rav Tikuchinsky is not talking about flowers. They're used for their view. He's talking about aromatic plants, right? Things are primarily used for their aroma. So now that's a very important distinction because suffice it to say that could be an important distinction. Right, based on Chazon Ish, Rav Kanievsky, Rav Kuchinsky, anything that is primarily used for perfume, for the aroma, has Gzat Shvit. What about flowers that are used for, to make my living room look nicer? I don't know. Presumably, it should be the same. It might not. Now, the Tzitz Eliezer basically says what Rav Baruch says, but with adding one more point. I said before, who needs the aroma? Who needs that? Who uses that? So, all right. So in the old days, this used to be part of an aromatherapy. This used to be it used to be very useful. But again, even when you say very useful for who? Very useful for people who require the therapy, right? How many therapists do we have here today? We have at least one doctor and one physical therapist. I think we're missing the other doctor. Right? I think that's what we have. All right, good enough. Requires therapy. Well, not everyone, right? Specific people require therapy. So Rav Vandenberg says, hold on. Why did the Bavli never bother asking this question? So here we have to remind ourselves of something we saw in the Gemara a long time ago. The Gemara starts off with this whole idea of hanato v'lo shava. All right, as we've been discussing all along. Then the second half of the Gemara is a machloket. Whether hanato v'lo shava is a true requirement or not. Now, who's more mekel? Well, it depends on what the question is, right? When we want to decide whether to categorize something as kadosh b'kedushat shvit, so which is the kula dik opinion? The one who puts fewer plants into the category of kedushat shvit is the kula, right? Because it requires less, it allows for more leniency, right? It's a bit confusing. That's why I'm making the point. If it has kedushat shvit, that creates more mess in the kitchen, right? You might have more kedusha, but it also requires more halachic knowledge and adherence, right? So the kula is to say does not have kedushat shvit, right? Now, who's the one who's more lenient in terms of what has kedushat shvit and what doesn't? The answer is Tanakama, because Tanakama says, for example, soaps would not have kedushat shvit. Rabbi Yossi says soaps do have kedushat shvit. Right? Because the question of hanato v'lo shava or not. So who's more machmir? Rabbi Yossi. Right, Rabbi Yossi is more machmir. Right. So here's a question: I have a plant that can only be used for soap. Does that have kedushat shvit? So Tanakama says it does not. Rabbi Yossi says it does. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi is more machmir, because now I have to be more careful how I use the soap. So there? I can't just pour the soap down the drain. So that's more machmir. It's just a bit confusing. That's why I'm reiterating the point. Now, so if Rabbi Yossi is more machmir, so we hold like Tanakama, as we said so far. All right, fair enough. Now, if Rabbi Yossi is more machmir, that means that anything, here's the important leap, anything Rabbi Yossi would agree does not have Kedushat Shvi'it, Tanakama would also say does not have Kedushat Shvi'it. All right? That's the assumption here. The way the Braita is written is not such a way that allows you to say, well, they each have their own opinion. The Braita is written as, in many cases, Tanakama would say it does not have Kedushat Shvi'it, and Rabbi Yossi would say it does. Therefore, anything Rabbi Yossi says does not have Kedushat Shvi'it, Tanakama would agree. All right. Question. Plants that are used for aromatherapy, do they have Kedushat Shvi'it? So that answer to that is right over here. Rabbi Yossi aktiv lo'ochla, u'imvela lo'ochla v'lo limlugma. What is melugma? Also, plants used for therapy. Therapeutic plants. Sorry?
Just a quick question. I mean, I'm saying with all serious, I think historically, I mean, people use the plants to make things smell better because people really smell bad. I mean,
Okay.
you know, I mean, just in all honesty. So just think about it, hygiene and everything in the past. I mean, that's not really aromatherapy, or are you just subsuming that under that?
The truth, I'm gonna. It's a fair point. I'm gonna expand. Don't worry. I'm gonna expand this point in a moment. So
Okay.
I'm gonna expand. I'm not gonna stay with the aromatherapy because I know it doesn't encompass the whole thing. It's just a starting point. So yeah, it's a fair point you're making. It's a fair critique. I'm using this as a jumping board to the next point. So you'll see. I'm not gonna stay with this. So. So plants that are used for therapeutic, melugma is therapeutic. So that there you do, right? But why do you decide to negate this one, not that one? Why not the other? Why not? Mara'ita is the important question. And the answer is shaveh b'chol adam. It says melugma she'ena shaveh b'chol adam. So melugma is not shaveh b'chol adam. Why is melugma not shaveh b'chol adam? Because only those who require therapy.
It is individual. It is individual.
Right. Why is it? But also, not everyone likes onions. Why is that not individual? Right. Sorry. You say, yeah, but everyone eats, right? Everyone eats. But does everyone need therapy? Is a different thing. It's a different category of thing, right? I don't like eggplants, so for me, eggplants don't have aren't shaveh b'chol adam. It doesn't work like that, right? And it's food. It is objective. I can't argue. It's inarguable that eggplant is food, even though I'd be happy it never enters my kitchen, right? So it's not, right?
But it's not a question of liking. It's a question if it is beneficial.
Correct.
So there's two things. You can like or cannot like. But if it is beneficial to you,
so that I'm not gonna accept fully, and I'll tell you why. Because it ruins the Tzitz Eliezer's mahalach. But more importantly, because where else do we have such a concept of shaveh l'chol adam? Hana shaveh l'chol adam. Or do we have a similar concept? We're in halacha.
Yontif, right? Hilchos Yontif.
Yontif, that's right. Yontif, what is it called? Shaveh l'chol nefesh. Can anyone remember what is I think the primary example the Gemara gives us something it's not shaveh l'chol nefesh. All right. So one of the prime examples the Gemara gives is mugmal. Mugmal is not shaveh l'chol nefesh. What is mugmal?
Aromatic spices that they burn.
Right. It's aromatic spices. It's incense, maybe that kind of right. Incense that you burn. You're not allowed to burn incense. Is that correct word? Right. You're not to burn incense on Yantiv, the Gemara says, because it's not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. Not everyone uses that. So I'm starting from the therapeutics that the Gemara says here. The Gemara says, why are therapeutic plants not don't according to Rabbi Yossi? Because they're not Shaveh L'chol Adam. Not everyone uses them. If I say, wait, not everyone uses them, the same could be said about aromatic plants as well, right? Because how do I know? Because the Gemara says. So says Tzitz Eliezer, why did the Bavli not bother asking about the perfumes? Because the Bavli says anything Rabbi Yossi says, Chamim say more, right? Chamim accept everything Rabbi Yossi says and beyond. Therefore, if I have plants that are used primarily for aroma we said in the Gemara in Beitza, in Ketubot also, right? That things that are not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. For example, things that incense that's used for as aroma is not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. And therefore, you can't burn on Yantiv, and also does not judge Shvit. Mimela says Tzitz Eliezer, the question is only according to Yerushalmi. The Bavli doesn't think it's a question. The Bavli has two very long sugad, Bavakama and in Sukkah, that we learned earlier, to discuss what is inedible and still has Kedushat Shvit, and does not mention this issue at all. Why not? Because it did already. By saying that Melugma is out, we said anything that not everyone uses does not have Kedusha. So Glenn, you see why I was only using that as jumping board to this. So it's not. It says, I want to read this in Tzitz Eliezer now. מצאנו בירושלים דשביעית מבעי ליה, בשמים מה שהיה להם קדושת שביעית, ולא הפשיטה. ראיתי בספר חזוני של שביעית, שמבאר בדור דבריו, די הספק ומחמת השמישן, ביד השמישן רק לתענוג, כך על עניין שביעית נמי בין שווה לכל אדם. יש מקום לומר, מכיוון דבבלי לא הוזכרה הבעיה הזו של ירושלמי, the Bavli never bothered asking the question, וברמב"ם לא הוזכר לחוש לה, שמאמינה דלא חשין לה. וסגרו לו פשיטות דלא נגע בקדושת שביעית, מהי תמה? עוד שווה לכל נפש, אינו סוג מאכל מעיקרו. הרי מצאתי בספר שו"ת ציץ הקודש שמביא הוראה בשם המהריל דיסקין, פשוט להגאון בדי הדס עם קדושת שביעית נוהגת, אף על פי שעומדים לריח. This is a very interesting point. The Bavli, where did the Bavli start from? Why is there a Gemara in Sukkah about Shmita? Why? What is the mission? What's the jumping board to that? What leads to the discussion about Shmita in the middle of Masechet Sukkah? So the Mishnah says, what happens if you have to buy an etrog on Shmita or Motzei Shmita, right? The etrog is Kshat Shvit, and now what do? Now it says the Gemara. Wait, what about a lulav? All right, what should be the next question? How many minim are there?
Hadas and Arava.
Right, so Arava is easy, right? Because Arava is just like lulav. It's not really useful in any way, right? The only reason we have Aravot, the only reason anyone grows Aravot is for Sukkot, right? Let's be honest. Right? So why do you bother growing them, right? They're just not useful.
Hadas can be used as besamim.
Oh, Hadas can be used as besamim. Why is the Bavli go from etrog to lulav, but doesn't discuss the Hadasim? Says Maril Diskin, says Tzitz Eliezer, because the Bavli does say about Hadasim. It says not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. Not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh doesn't have Kedusha. So says Tzitz Eliezer, yeah, that we did, the Bavli did discuss that. Mele says Tzitz Eliezer like this, when the Rambam mentions Ktaf over here, earlier we said that Rav Kanievsky said this whole Ktaf business, the Rambam here is talking about like maple, that kind of sap. And then you say, is that a primary use or not a primary use? So yeah, we know the maple is very expensive. Thank you, Canadians. That's definitely would have Kedushat Shvit if you managed to grow it in Israel, which I think you just can't. Wrong climate, I think, right? Wouldn't work. But the Rambam here is talking about edible Ktaf. What about Ktaf that's used only as bosem? As it's Eliezer, the Rambam too would agree, doesn't have Kedushat Shvit. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi. Because not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. If it's only for the aroma, it's not Shaveh L'chol Nefesh. So that's how the Chazon Ish says that. So you have the, on the one side, you have primarily, I guess you'd say, mainly Chazon Ish and Rav Tukachinsky, who say that plants that are used for perfumes and their aroma have Kedushat Shvit, and the Tzitz Eliezer and Mariel Diskin, who say that they do not. Now let's have a look at flowers that are used for their look, for the way they look, and not for their smell. So says Rav Tukachinsky, Vladim shonim, strange. Shem she'enem tam v'reach, nit'im lifnei habatim v'hasharim rak lenoi, nireh she'enem din shvit. So just an important distinction. You're not allowed to plant anything during Shmita. Don't get that wrong. You're not allowed to plant them. The point is not that you're allowed to plant them. The point is, if they grow, you're allowed to pick them. You're allowed to do whatever you want. לא דמי לצמח העומד לצביעה, אף שגם הצביעה הרי רק לנוי, או לצמח ולשמן העומד להדלקה, שגם זה רק לראייה. את המנה הזו, הצביעה, המאור, משמשת גוף האדם וצרכיו. מה כן בשם שהם רק להיראות בעלמא, שאין זו הנאה גופנית. So says Rav Tukachinsky, Rav Tukachinsky says like this: something you eat, something that lights up the room, something that you utilize and use, right? All those things have Kedushat Shvit. So even something that's used for its aroma, even if you don't need to harm it, but it's used for the aroma, has Kedushat Shvit. But if the point is for it to just to be there, you want to turn into part of the room, you just want it to be there. He says that's no different from bookcases. It's even worse than bookcases, because it's not as useful as bookcases. Bookcases, you can argue, they have a use. These things don't have a use, so it doesn't count. And therefore, he says there's a distinction. So Rav Tukachinsky says, even I, who agree with the Chazon Ish, and says even Chazon Ish would agree that not only that when it comes to aromatic plants, that's one thing. There you utilize, right? You're using the content of the plant. When it comes to the flowers, you just want them to look good. That you're not utilizing anything in the plant, you just have it hung there, just have it sitting there. That doesn't have Kedushat Shvit. Now, what about if they also have a scent? So it says
before you get to the scent,
sure.
Why at dinner tables do people have flowers? Why, if you go into Knesset for a meeting, are there flowers on the table? Why, if you go into the White House or congressional meeting areas, there are flowers everywhere? It's clearly for beauty, but the understanding is that the beauty, has a value.
So
They change these flowers every day. So to say it has no value.
Oh, we're not saying it has no value. It's more that there's no, I think the point is there's no intake. You know what I'm saying? We're not saying there's no value because people spend a lot of money on flower arrangements. Yeah,
There's no physical benefit. There's no physical benefit.
There's no
That's
physical.
what we don't have.
So I'd say more precisely, there's no physical intake, right?
Intake or benefit.
Right. You don't need to. So you can say, well, what about something used as a fuel to light the room up, not for heat, but to light the room up? Say, yeah. So there is a utilization of, right? So if I do one of those two, there's a physical intake or utilization of. In those cases, it would have Kedusha. But here, the flowers are just there, right? So that they're just now again. You made a few weddings, right? So you know that flower arrangements, people spend a lot of money on flower arrangements, right? And yet, but still we can see the difference, right? It's a different kind of hana'ah, right? Now, so Rav Efrati says about flowers that has. Rav Efrati says about flowers that are also aromatic. He says like this: מפני שעיקר נטייתם, גידולם, קטיפתם, קנייתם, הווה לנוי, וכן נוי סביר לן שאין בהם משום קדושת שביעית, לכן שאפילו שיש בהם ריח, לא תחול בהם קדושת שביעית, משום שרוב הפרחים אין בהם קדושת שביעית, מלעצים, שענתם ובעורם שווה, ואין קדושת שביעית מני רוב העצים. Remember we mentioned the Gemara itself, the Gemara said, there could be, trees can be used for light, so right, but that's not the primary use, so it doesn't count. Here too, the flowers aren't primarily used for their aroma, if they're flowers that are also aromatic, right? If the reason I pick them and the reason I buy them is for their looks and not for their scent, they should be okay. That means it does not קדושת שביעית. שחולקים על כך סביר לפרחים שיש בהם ריח, אף שאינם עומדים לריח, יש בהם קדושת שביעית. למה? אפילו אם נאמר כי דבר שענתו ובראש שווה, אלא שאינו עומד לו טענה, אין בו קדושת שביעית. לא נדע שעדיפות לפרחי נוי שיש בהם ריח, די, כל שיהיו לפניו שתי אגודות של פרחים שווים במראם, זה עדיף את הפרחים נותני הריח, והוא חמל את הריח חשוב, ושגם יש בפרחים אלו קדושת שביעית. So I think the question is, what is your litmus test? There are two ways of, I proposed one litmus test and he's proposing a different one. I think that's the machloka between these two paragraphs. You go to the corner shop and you look at two bouquets and you say, all right, one of these two. And the salesperson says, oh, you know, this one has an amazing scent. You gotta smell this, right? They say, oh, you know, it does have a great scent. Great, I'll buy it. Right? I'll buy that one. So that would be a tiebreaker. It says Rafati, so what did you just do? You bought scented flowers, as you did, right? You chose the scent, right? But I say the scent was only a tiebreaker because I had no idea, because I had no other way of deciding. Would I ever go and say, listen, this one looks nice. This one doesn't really look nice. But this one smells really good. As long as that's not, again, ever, I imagine sometimes people do that. Yes, sometimes there could be other considerations as well, but since that's not the normal way, when we buy flowers for Shabbos, we focus on the look. And that's why the litmus test he says here of the tiebreaker, I think would only be relevant to halacha if it's a significant one. If in a case in which you go and say, listen, I want scented flowers. He says, well, these look good enough. I'm like, yeah, they look good enough, but those, right, these maybe, you know, these look good enough, but I really want scented flowers. And in such a case, then it would be relevant. But if you say, I want flowers for Shabbos for my Shabbos table, it look nice. He says, yeah, well, these also have a scent. That'll be a tiebreaker, but it wouldn't really be enough to say, oh, in that case, what you're doing is you're buying aromatic flowers.